Well, here we are. We're doing Behavior 1, what I'm calling Behavior 1. I'm going to subtitle this Principles, Principles of Behavior. It's a fascinating subject, somewhat subject to interpretation, the way things are named and interpreted. It's not like math, like 1 plus 1 equals 2. You can have certain stimuli and still not get a response you're thinking of, and we're going to talk a little bit about all that stuff. But behavior is very important, whether you're a pet owner or a dog breeder, dog trainer, own cats, have cats and dogs, have children and dogs. It's important to understand the behavior of the animal. Of course, I've got some cute pictures I'm going to show you. I know some about horses. I know a lot about dogs. Right now, I can tell you that probably neither of those two animals there in the center of the screen are stressed. To me, it's like they're old buddies. That dog would not be so relaxed if it wasn't comfortable around his buddy there, the horse. And by the way, horses always like companions. Doesn't have to be another horse, but they'd much rather be with some companion than by themselves. Okay, another beautiful picture. Two wild stallions, maybe fighting for territory, fighting for a mare. Who knows? We're just having a little snapshot here. We don't know what's to the left or right. They could be brothers just playing. The male horse, the stallions tend to be kind of rough with each other. I know some horse breeders that have all the little fillies in one paddock. They interact well, but the little colts have to be separated because they get just a little bit too rowdy with each other. And then, of course, here's a neat little picture here. I'm trying to get them all at one time. This one here in the center, if you have a buddy like that, you don't need an umbrella, do you? And I think we can kind of tell that there's nobody stressed in that environment. And finally, I'm going to move that up. And before I forget, I'm going to put Dr. Andrew Lucher's name in the center of the screen there because I wanted to give him a shout out because basically all I've learned about behavior was from Dr. Lucher. So Dr. Lucher, thank you. Some of your ideas are in this presentation, this lesson, or even in all my maybe behavior lessons. So I wanted to give you a shout out, buddy. Thanks a lot. Before I forget a word over here on the right, I wanted to define ethology by saying that's the study of animal behavior. It's usually referred to when animals are being studied in their wild habitat, let's put it that way, in the wild. There's other names given to it when you're doing laboratory kind of tests, like let's say rats in a maze, but for us, I think we can just say ethology, the study of animal behavior. Well, there's a good place to start probably, the definition of behavior. And again, remember, not everybody's going to agree with maybe I've got four different definitions just to show you, there's kind of wiggle room. Depends on your point of view. But of course, I got to show you another cute little picture. If you're a dog lover like I am, and an ice cream lover, and a kid lover, there you go. Perfect. Uh, let's share. There's some behavior there going on. That's sharing, I guess. Good behavior. Okay, here's some definitions. Observable actions that reflect internal regulatory mechanisms. I really like that because maybe this dog here on the right, of course, the dog is on the right. Don't have to say that probably, but the dog might be hungry and its appetite centers in the brain are sending out signals, find food. And there it is. Or it might be hot. Remember, its internal temperature sensors are saying cool off, and it knows maybe it's learned that ice cream is good. I think most dogs are not born knowing that ice cream is good. So, observable actions that reflect internal regulatory mechanisms. That's pretty good. Here's another one. The response of an animal to its environment. Okay, so usually there's something in the animal's environment and the animal responds to it. That's a pretty straightforward definition. Here's another one. The way in which an animal acts in response to a stimulus. So there in our picture, the stimulus is the ice cream cone, and how does it react? By licking the ice cream cone. Both of these animals are doing that, aren't they? Finally, another definition. Responses. Now I kind of like this one. So let me get my pointer going. Responses, which are actions or inactions. I like that idea because maybe some stimuli don't invoke an action that you can see. Okay, so responses, actions or inactions, to internal or external stimuli. Yeah, because I'll give you an example. If a horse has colic, that's abdominal pain that's arising from within its digestive tract, usually the cecum / large colon back there. There's pain, that's the internal stimuli, and the response might be kicking at its stomach, looking back towards its flank region. Okay. Response is an inaction to internal external stimuli. Let's say if a dog is used to farm cats being around, or cats that live inside, and a cat walks across a doorway and the dog happens to see it, it's not going to do anything. It's like, okay, there's my friend the cat. But let's say a rabbit walked across the same doorway opening, and the dog loves to chase things and knows it's done that in the past, chasing rabbits, then the response would be action, chasing that external stimuli. So that's 4 different definitions. They're all kind of the same. I kind of like the very first one and the last one best because it's talking about something internal or external. And the bottom one, the 4th one, is probably the best because a response may be an inaction to something that we're going to talk about habituation later. So it might be something you're used to seeing so much it doesn't invoke anything. Okay, so now remember, not everybody agrees 100% with what I'm going to say. I know that, but it's like economists in a room. Not everybody's going to agree with the definition of recession or inflation, so I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. Causes of behavior. Well, you're going to see it's more complicated than what I've got on this screen, but I'm going to say, hey, there's proximate causes. Proximate means they're immediate triggers and they're very close in time or space to the response. So let's say we have a herd of zebra in Africa, and one of the zebras sees a line on the hillside coming towards it, and the zebra gives like a warning sound. Okay, the warning sound is a proximate cause for everybody else to scatter. The warning sound that's made by that one zebra is very close in time or space to everybody else, and we all know, if we're zebras, we all know that that means get the heck out of here. Okay, that's a proximate cause. Then there are ultimate causes. This is a little more complicated, but it actually takes in the bigger picture, and these causes are not really close in time or space. We'll go back to that zebra example. Well, the warning sound from a herd mate was the proximate cause. Well, the ultimate cause for everybody to run might be survival. Eons have learned and know that sound means run. So it's an ultimate cause. It's a bigger picture. it's survival of the species, and that's ultimate causes. Okay, I wanted to look at the causes of behavior in a broader sense now. More, we talked about the proximate and the ultimate causes. That's two ways to divide things. But here's five ways, five additional ways, or they're actually embedded in the previous proximate and ultimate causes. Okay, so causes of behavior. I've got five listed here. I'll read through them, and then we're going to go through each one. Stimulus control. That means we see a stimulus, or an animal does, and then there's a response. Okay? Then you can talk about motivation. We're going to talk about intrinsic and extrinsic. Maybe the old dog gets up when it sees a treat someplace. That would be extrinsic motivation, and it wouldn't have got up unless it saw that treat. So there's motivation. It can be internal or external. For people, there's a lot of internal motivation, right? You study, you get a grade, you feel good. The grade is actually extrinsic. Probably you're going to get that grade, but you feel good about yourself and your future. Then there's genetics, and you might subtitle that domestication, because for our pets, we have domesticated animals, right? Dogs, cats, and horses. Domestication is an animal species. Domesticated species are animals that live and provide some benefit for mankind, like cattle are domesticated. Dogs are domesticated. So then mankind has come in here, and we've genetically selected for animals, right? I mean, look at the dog breeds. Oh my gosh. Incredible number of dog breeds. Some are sight hounds, some are scent hounds, some are herding dogs. And we did it all. That's genetic selection. And then adaptation, I should have maybe put thousands of years. If you look at some animals, they've adapted to either a changing environment, something over time. But I mean, this is eons basically. And then learning, we're going to have a separate lesson on animal learning because, right, there's operant conditioning. You could also call it operant learning. So the effects of learning, the effects of experience definitely can be a cause of behavior. Okay, now we're going to focus upon stimulus control. So I'm going to move that up there a little bit, make sure I don't get it in the way. So I'm going to concentrate on stimulus control, but I left those other ones on the screen just to show you how that works. So I've got a little drawing here or some words down here. So stimulus control actually can be broken into four subtypes. And the reflex is actually wired. It's like a neural reflex. It's wired in utero. The animal doesn't have to learn it at all. It's just rather automatic. One good example in cats is they're what's called a reflex ovulator. They do not have to learn how to ovulate, but there's a certain stimulus, which is mating by the male, and the response is ovulation. And it's a very tightly controlled thing. They're born with it. Now, a female cat can't be mated at birth and you get ovulation. That reflex isn't really operational till later. But it's I always say it's wired in utero, and it may be present at birth, like when dogs and cats are born, they can't urinate by themselves. Their mother has to lick the anal genital area to stimulate defecation and urination, okay? But if you're raising an orphan dog or cat, you can take a nice warm washcloth and mimic the same thing, and it's a reflex. It's wired in utero, and it's going to take no learning at all. It's just going to happen. Okay, so then there's fixed action patterns, FAPs. Well, these are like innate behaviors. Some people might call it instinct. And there's something that triggers the behavior, a specific stimulus, and then once it starts, it goes to completion. Okay? So you might think of salivation in dogs. When they see meat, they don't even have to have it in their mouths. They will salivate, and it's basically a fixed action pattern, okay, for the dog, especially the wolf, and of course the dog was domesticated. Another example I have is when a dog, and I've had my dogs do this, and they don't really learn this. When they are ready to lay down in some kind of their nest, they tend to circle once or twice, and then they lay down, and that's a fixed action pattern. And all the members of the species does a fixed action pattern. Somebody else said maybe lifting the leg in the male dog to mark trees, urination, is a fixed action pattern. I remember, I think I'm going to have to say all my male dogs I've had for years always do that. They did it even when other dogs weren't around, so they didn't learn it by observation. They just know how to do that. Okay, so then modal action patterns. Some people say they're the same as fixed action patterns, and I wouldn't argue with that, okay? But some people believe that the modal action pattern, the MAP, is similar to a FAP, but it might be more variable in its response. So it's not going to be quite as fixed as the FAPs. But if you want to believe they're both the same, because in the reading, if you go reading, there's some people that call it both the same, some mention both of them, whatever. And then, of course, learning, you can learn a response from a certain stimulus. If you see two different people, let's say you're a dog, and you see one person and you've learned that they never give you a treat, you're not going to do anything. But if you see your other person, I'm talking like a dog now, that always pets you, gives you treats, praises you, takes you for a walk, you've learned to do something. You're going to get up and greet that person. So the stimulus, the person is the stimulus, a certain person, and then the response is wagging tails and all that kind of stuff. Well, now we're going to do motivation. Talk a little bit about motivation. And I've got these two words over here, intrinsic and extrinsic, because intrinsic means coming from within. An animal can, be hungry and see something to eat, and that's the appetite centers are giving it intrinsic motivation to move. Or if you have a dog that likes to chase rabbits, if you're a rabbit lover, I'm sorry to use that example, but I live out in the country and there's rabbits all over, and dogs around here chase the rabbits. I don't encourage it, but it's basically, a motivation to go get the rabbit. And that could be an extrinsic stimulus, right? Seeing something to chase. Dogs are famous for chasing things. And some people do say that's a fixed action pattern. When a dog sees something run by it, that's the stimulus to get up and chase, and that's constant across that species. But of course, motivation and learning can affect that too. You should know about motivation is sometimes a stimulus doesn't always cause the same response because it depends on the motivation. If the animal is sick and internally has pain, it's not going to get up and run, whereas every other day it did. So it's very interesting. Another thing, like let's say body temperature. If the dog is hot and it sees shade or water to swim in, that's motivation to go swimming or seek the shade. Hormones can be in this category. It's kind of interesting. Cats are seasonal breeders, and that relies on their long day breeders. So as the photoperiod gets longer, that means the length of daylight gets longer. Certain hormones change, like melatonin, and that's going to be some intrinsic factor, or let's say intrinsic motivation, to start estrous cycles. All kinds of stuff like that. Another example that I've heard of is pheromones. Motivation, that would be a pheromone is a scent that comes from an animal of the same species. So I'm looking at extrinsic motivation here. A pheromone is perceived by one animal, and that animal has some reaction to the pheromone. So all kinds of great stuff about motivation. Okay, now we're going to talk about genetics, our third item on the list. And remember I said you could think of it slash domestication, right? So I'm going to put that there because our companion animals, or all our domestic animals by definition, have been living with mankind for the benefit of mankind, or maybe some cases you could say for the benefit of both animals, depends on how you interpret it. And so when we have domestication, then mankind can do artificial selection of animals, right? We can determine the color of the offspring. I mean, oh my gosh, the animal breeders do this all the time. They want a certain color or body type. And so genetics can then mold over time behavior. You can have a dog that's a herding dog, or you can have a dog that's a scent dog. Just all kinds of examples. Another thing about uh, genetics and domestication is this neoteny term here. I'll encircle it. And that's basically when our animals, and dogs are a great example, retain juvenile characteristics all the way through their adult life. They never really become a full-fledged, let's say, adult when you think of behavior of their ancestors. And dogs are a great example. I mean, I've had a Great Pyrenees, Monique, God bless you, shout out to Monique. She was so gentle and never really displayed many traits of a wolf, right? A wolf becomes an adult and they're mean and, there's a pecking order and all that. Monique, the Great Pyrenees, she retained juvenile characteristics throughout her life. So that's genetics. Okay, so now we're still doing the causes of behavior, but now it gets a little harder to explain. So I'm really going to summarize these last 2 points in the same time here. Adaptation. I probably should have said thousands of years. But when you look at animals, maybe not so much the domestic animals, but when you think of all the animals out there in the wild, they've learned to adapt to their surroundings. And, some have been extinct, obviously, become extinct if they couldn't adapt. Others adapt very well, like let's say the coyotes that live near towns. They're adapting, they're getting less afraid of people. They're going into getting garbage when they get hungry. They're adapting to live near people, but obviously coyotes are not domesticated. And then learning, we're going to have a separate lesson on animal learning. But there's a lot of behavioral changes that can occur from learning. You can learn not to be reactive to a plane flying over, but when you first saw the plane flying over, if you were a dog, let's say you were afraid. Or lightning. I've I don't think I've ever had a dog that was afraid of lightning and thunder. I talked about Monique earlier. Monique, when it got to be lightning and thunder, she would run out there and bark at the clouds. And it was her way of protecting her family, us. She didn't want the lightning or thunder to hurt us. She would go out there, and I literally had to drag her inside so she wouldn't get killed. Okay. Okay, I'm going to end this lesson. It's plenty long, and show you the list of those beautiful illustrations. There's all kinds of dogs, cats, and kids' photos out there. It's just, you could look at them forever. Take care. See you for Behavior 2.